Hi, my name's Ian. I'm an engineer. I'm a dad. I've been worried about climate change, and I've been feeling a little bit better. I mean, yeah, people are destroying a bunch of programs, but over the long term, I think solutions will win out. And I think we might have a very important solution. Today, we use 100 million barrels of oil every day. 100 million. So what are we going to do? It's mostly for transport. EVs are there, but there's also this green fuel. Hydrogen, we can get hydrogen from water, green power water. And nitrogen, the air's 78% nitrogen. Now, why would you want green fuel versus EVs? People will often say, wind to wheel efficiency. You've got the green power and you put it in a car and you go. I think I think if we do the math, we're gonna see something a little bit different. So EVs, people say that they're efficient, right? And therefore they must be better than green fuel, right? Must be. It's simple math. Again, let's do it. Green fuel, wind, air, and water to make NH3 ammonia. It's flammable. Um, it's simple. You don't need grids. It's a very different solution. And part of the reason you want this solution is it has 12 times more energy in a liter than lithium, which means you can store enough energy to run a tractor all day or run a ship across the ocean or a big train. Things that you really can't do with lithium batteries, even if they get 50% better, right? It's 12 times better. 12 times. But are EVs more efficient? Is that the killer? Is that why you're going to do that? Is that the trade-off? Instead of one turbine, right? They're expensive. Do you need three for fuel? Well, the motor, people say it's 80 to 90% efficient, the EV motor, versus a combustion engine, 30 to 45%. But the motor is only one part of the story. You have the efficiency of the turbine. You have power lines, you have chargers, you have extra weight, and your batteries degrade over time. So let's look at some of these and think about what it actually means. So, first, green energy is really geographic. Some places are just windier than other places, quite a bit more. It's a huge difference. There's a resource, you can go check it out yourself, globalwindatlas.info. Florida doesn't have a lot of wind. It has terrible wind for generating power. And so if you wanted Florida to be totally green, you would need twice as many windmills as Dallas. It's very geographic. And moving power is actually expensive. Power lines are super expensive compared to pipelines. Even a hydrogen pipeline to move energy, the amount of energy you can move per dollar is like 10 times more. Oil, it's like 100,000. It's wildly different. So the difference between 25% and 50% I mean, it's simple math. It's a huge difference. Then you have grid losses, right? When even though you're not transporting it all across the country, putting energy into that grid, it's a 5-7% transmission loss. Depends on where you are, what you're doing. Here's a link to one of the places you can look, but it's real. And so the energy that the wind, right, goes to the turbine, then goes to the grid, and there's losses. One of the things with green power is this thing called curtailment. Often it is windy when we don't need the power, so we don't use it. So you're not fully utilizing the turbines you have. Curtailment right now is about 5% of total potential production. But as we add more green resources to the grid, the total amount of curtailment goes up, right? Because if you have more turbines, they're all not going to be needed at the same time, right? So curtailment, again, how much wind and are we making the best use of it? Right? Wind isn't scarce, but we paid for the turbine. EVs have charger losses. Filling up those batteries creates heat, and that can be 10-25%, right? So that's it's energy that was captured and transmitted to your house across power lines with curtailment, and then there's heat loss. EVs have a lot of extra weight, and extra weight is extra energy. You're using energy to move that extra weight. So when they weigh 1,500 pounds extra, that's extra energy you're using. So it's efficient at doing more work, right? You have to count that in. Weight versus efficiency, we can talk aerodynamics, sure, but it is a very clear relationship. There's rolling resistance and it matters, right? It's a very clear curve. So yeah, EV motor efficiency, sure, it's 80-90%, right? Of doing more work, charger losses, transmission, the whole deal. And then the batteries lose charge or lose the ability to hold charge as they cycle. So it's 80 to 90 when it's new, right? But over time, it drops to 70. So, what do you want to average that at? 80, 90? Like, it matters. We should factor it in. And that curve was over 100,000 kilometers. Anything, transport trucks, they run 750,000 kilometers. Then you have carbon debt. You can count that in or not, do your roll it up yourself, make your own decision, but a lot of energy goes into creating those batteries. Best estimate I could find, and they range, right? Use it, don't use it, is like 37 barrels of oil go into making the battery for one Tesla. So, do you want to factor that in as the extra? Because maybe one day you can make that instead of with oil, you can make that with with a different EV, right? But that's power that's still spent, right? It's still part of your efficiency equation. So EV, wind to road, right? You should consider the capacity factor of the turbine because depending on where you are, you'll need more turbines to get the same power, right? So maybe it's 25%, maybe it's 50%. Your transmission losses, maybe 95, maybe you're not going far. Maybe it's 97. You're going to have some curtailment, meaning we're making power, but the grid doesn't need it. 90, 95, charger heat. Maybe it's a high voltage. Maybe we improve the technology. So 75 to 90%, right? Extra weight. Yeah, sure. We're going to use better aluminum for the rest of the thing and maybe net it's 70 or 75, right? The motor, 80, 90. Battery degradation. Maybe it's 80%, maybe it's 95%. Maybe we're not worried about that. Maybe new battery technology doesn't do that. Carbon debt, right? Maybe we're recycling these batteries in some future thing where it's actually not using that much energy. So 70 to 95. The assumptions you make will really change this math. It has a huge difference on this math, right? Your wind to road could be 5%. And maybe if you rosy glasses, everything's perfect, maybe it's 27%. But like let's just do some sensitivity here. If you're in Florida, you're just in Florida, right? There is no the wind isn't getting any better. So even with amazing technology, you still you still have a capacity factor of about 25%. Japan, same thing, right? Why isn't Toyota all over EVs? Why weren't they leading or Honda? They don't have good wind. So if you just change wind, nothing else, you're down to, wind to road 13%. And that's with really generous assumptions of everything else. Now, the story with green fuel, it's got a kind of few fewer steps, right? It's a pretty simple story. You only do it in places with great capacity factors. You do it in places like Greenland or Newfoundland or the outback of Australia, right? You do it in places where the green power is just off the chart. So 50% capacity factor. Now, your process efficiency to take that electricity and, and, and turn it into fuel, it's about 59%. Uh, your There's no curtailment, there's no line losses because you're doing it right there. There's no curtailment because the process can use variable speed. So as it's blowing harder, you make more fuel. So you've got this fuel, about 59% efficient process. Then you transport it. It's a liquid. I said we use 100 million barrels of oil. We use 5 million barrels of ammonia every day. There's tanks, there's ships, simple technology. It doesn't need to be refined. You just take it and move it wherever you want. There's pipelines. And then you take this fuel and you put it in a vehicle. If you put in something that's like a diesel, the diesel thermodynamically is a bit more efficient than a gasoline in the temperatures it's running, etc. So in a diesels are quite efficient. They can be up to 45% efficient. Gasolines maybe is quite a bit less. It can be down to 30, 35, depending on what you're doing. You could put this in a hybrid, right? Get the regen on the braking. But, you know, again, make the assumptions you want to make, but it's simple. Now, 59%. So this is US Department of Energy, their number on the efficiency, right? The energy in versus energy captured in the chemical. They say hydrogen 75%, but that is hydrogen at almost no pressure. It actually takes a lot of energy to compress hydrogen, like the Toyota car that used hydrogen, that was at 10,000 psi To do that creates a lot of heat, takes cooling. It's energy intensive to do that. So that 75% isn't real. Ammonia is basically a liquid at room temperature. Under Yeah. So the methane is e-methane, which again is a gas, would take compression. That's 52%. So ammonia is better than e-methane. E-methane requires carbon. Where are you going to get that? It's actually expensive to do direct air carbon capture. Methanol, 48%, and the synthetic diesel, 42%. So to make ammonia, you don't need carbon and it's more efficient than any liquid solution. That's kind of why I talk about this, right? So add it up, your hydrogen, sorry, your ammonia, uh, wind to road math. It's pretty simple. Take your capacity factor, your production efficiency, transport energy, engine. Now, so in my low end, I'm using numbers I wouldn't really use. I think you would only do this in a place with a 50% capacity factor. And your production efficiency is probably pretty well established. It's probably more towards 59 than 55. Maybe your equipment's not so good. Transport, maybe you have to take this a real long way. So 90 instead of 95. It doesn't take that. Liquids have so much energy that proportionally to move them doesn't it's not that much energy compared to what's in it. An oil tanker going across the ocean uses very little oil compared to how much oil is in the tanker, right? But still, here we're worst case 7%, best case 12%. Play with your own assumptions, but here's kind of a ballpark. So, are EVs more efficient than green fuel? No, they're not. It seems surprising, but they're not. They're 5 to 10%. With today's technology, 5 to 10%. Maybe in the future a bit better, but 5 to 10% versus making ammonia and using it as a fuel. It's 7 to 12. It's it, and it's 100% green. I mean, I'm did the whole thing with the EV pretending that somewhere you have a grid entirely driven by green power, and you don't. You don't. That's not a thing, right? So, from an energy perspective, if you want to look at wind to road, ammonia is a winning solution. That makes me happy. That makes me happy because we can do things like transport trucks, pickup trucks. You can do you can do whatever you want because you don't have that restriction of the batteries that don't have enough juice. I hope this was interesting. If you don't agree with my math, let me know. If you want the links, I'll post them, but you want to send me different links, that's fine. Anyway, that's why I'm feeling a bit better. Makes sense. Okay.